everybody.
Hello everyone and welcome back to this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment, which should be another enthralling segment about a young wide receiver who's on the rise, I do want to remind you yet again to consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network as a whole. Also, if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It's a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole. Also, remember that you can leave any questions, comments, concerns about the show, and they will be addressed at the beginning of the next episode. But without further ado, let's jump right into another fantasy player profile for another receiver who had flashes of brilliance in his rookie season, but never truly maintained them. I truly think that he's going to become a bigger option in his sophomore season in the NFL. So without further ado, let's look more into the player profile of Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers, like I said, had some high highs last year. But as the season wore on, the pressures of being at the very least a wide receiver one in the Baltimore Ravens system got to him a little bit. As we saw in the latter stages of the postseason in the AFC Championship round, his fumble was a crucial turning point in that game against the Chiefs, and ultimately was one of the reasons as to why they might have lost that game. But, like I said, I truly believe that Zay Flowers has the potential, especially in a Baltimore Ravens offense that is yearning for wide receiver help outside of tight end Mark Andrews, who can really assume the role as a guy that Lamar Jackson is not afraid to throw the ball to. So without further ado, let's jump right into why Zay Flowers can be that guy and some areas where he might need improving. His rookie season, he accumulated 129.4 fantasy points, and this is an interesting stat to know, because Mark Andrews, as we all know, is very injury prone. Without Mark Andrews on the field, his first read share increased to 30%. He was 22nd in receptions. His first down route running is around 0.08 seconds. He was 33rd in receiving yards, 21st among wide receivers in target share, and 28th in terms of touchdown catches. So as you can see, had a very rocky kind of season. Not necessarily terrible, but not necessarily a rookie season to fully realize what he can become. But next year, I truly believe that fantasy projections have him around the kind of year where it's not necessarily the best sophomore year, but he's continuing to build as his career progresses. And I think that by his fourth or fifth year, Zay Flowers will be talking about as one of the top wide receivers in fantasy and in football itself. 967 yards projected for next season, 6 touchdowns for a total of 142.8 fantasy points. So a slight improvement from his rookie season. See Zay Flowers as someone you might want to take a flyer on. However, I see him as more of a streaming option, mainly for the reason that there hasn't necessarily been that many successful Baltimore wide receivers in fantasy. When you're looking at Baltimore skill position players, the first player that really catches your eye is Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews certainly is someone in that mold, as we've always talked about tight end in the show, that truly fits that old guard who still has something in them. As Mark Andrews continues to progress throughout his career, I think that Lamar Jackson is most comfortable with him as well. And not saying that Zay Flowers can't become that, as Mark Andrews might get more into talks of retirement in the next couple of years, but right now I mainly see Mark Andrews opening the pathways for different players in this Baltimore Ravens offense, not Zay Flowers at the moment. Now, when I also look at this Baltimore Ravens offense, it isn't necessarily as heavily RPO oriented as people think. Yes, there are some options to pass that Lamar does, but the Baltimore Ravens offense mainly is more comfortable orientating everything around the run. And they just went out and got Derrick Henry, who's very comfortable being that bell cow. I don't know how much longevity Derrick Henry will have in this offense, but at least for this season, he definitely offers a certain kind of outlet that the Baltimore Ravens have never had at the running back position. He's not just a guy who is looking for yards after contact. He's a guy who's going to absorb contact. He's a guy who's going to get you chunk yardage and not necessarily a guy who just explodes on the field, which I really think helps create a certain kind of tempo for this Baltimore Ravens offense. And in terms of how that will affect the wide receivers, I'm not quite certain. But let's say you have first down plays where Derrick Henry's running the ball, maybe even in screen action. That gives you a little leeway on second down to maybe get something in the short to intermediate areas of the field, and that's where Zay Flowers could make his money in terms of fantasy. He wants to improve his route running, it seems like. There's some times where he was a little inconsistent coming in and out of breaks. He was a little inconsistent in where to go, and that might have affected how Lamar Jackson's relationship with him had developed. But for now, I'll say that Zay Flowers seems to me to be the kind of guy who is going to make his money in the short to intermediate areas of the field. He can't extend Lamar Jackson's range in terms of passing. I really believe that Zay Flowers is one of those guys who can become a vertical threat, especially in terms of yards after catch ability. But that's not where I see the direction of the Baltimore Ravens offense going, because this Henry signing really perplexes me in how they're willing to develop the complexities of this offense. And so it really gives me pause trying to figure out how Zay Flowers is going to develop in terms of the passing game when you bring in a guy who's seemingly kind of aging out of the league and is just meant to be a bell cow who just gets you the chunk yardage. Maybe I feel like Greg Roman wants a guy that can set up the deep throw where you get the 6 to 7 yards or 5 to 6 yards that you want on a first down situation, and then you can air the ball out, and maybe that will make Zay Flowers' life a little bit easier. But for now, there's just a lot more questions surrounding A, the health, and B, the longevity of the Baltimore Ravens offense, because you can only waste Lamar Jackson's prime of his career so much by trying to implement new ways to open up different lanes for him to succeed. And right now, after one of his better passing seasons since the early stages of his career, since maybe even his rookie season, I think that the Baltimore Ravens offense right now really is not as consistent as it's been in terms of looking at different fantasy assets. Yes, I think that Mark Andrews is still going to be that guy from the skill position groups who you're going to take immediately just because, as a member of that old guard of tight ends, he's always going to be consistent no matter what. But outside of that, I really want to say that I'm confident that Zay Flowers can develop into something more than just a flex option or even someone you stream. But right now, I just can't because, like I said, it seems like there's a directionless approach in Baltimore because you had a good foundation set up last year where there were glimpses of what the passing game could be. There were glimpses of what a more passing-oriented offense revolving around Lamar Jackson could be. And what stemmed from that was really incredible to watch. It was some of the best football I've seen Baltimore play in the Lamar Jackson era, at least in the regular season, of course. But now, going out and seemingly getting a guy that will just shake up how they set up their run game and affecting the passing game more than people would think really muddies the waters of what the skill position groups in Baltimore can really do. And it's really kind of amazing to me because when I look at Baltimore, it's just Zay Flowers at the wide receiver position and then Rashad Bateman, who I really don't consider to be a guy who's going to explode himself. So many injuries in his career as well. I really think that this is going to be another transitional year, kind of a developmental year for some of these players. And I think that can lead to Zay Flowers' benefit because I think it's going to increase in target share. But the main point is, in order for the Baltimore Ravens offense to succeed, I think that all three of Flowers, Henry, and Andrews need to be healthy. And there also needs to be an innate understanding of how this dynamic is going to work. Because all three are very interesting players. Mark Andrews is an established veteran, so is Derrick Henry. Zay Flowers is an unproven product. But there is potential for this offense to do good, and Zay Flowers to be a part of it, not just another name outside of Henry, Andrews, and Jackson. Zay Flowers can have a say in this, but it'll all depend on how the Baltimore Ravens offense schemes around a different sort of running back than they've had in the past. And that should say a lot about what Zay Flowers' stock is going to look like come fantasy drafts. That'll just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we transition from wide receiver to running back, as one of the most electrifying, speedy running backs in the league comes under my discussion. We'll be right back to discuss that young man after the break.
Looking for your daily